Okay, welcome everyone to episode 19 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is a special bonus pod. I'm Ty, and I will actually be doing this one solo as my father and usual wonderful co-host, Mr. C, is currently on vacation this week, but we wanted to give you guys a special bonus pod here, recapping my first trip on Everest on May 12th, so just a few days ago. I'm currently here at Everest Base Camp, so last time we were in Kare, we are now living in a tent at 17,500 feet, 5,300 meters above sea level here at the Asian Trekking Everest Base Camp. And we're back down now. So hopefully this goes well. This is the first time I'm doing this pod solo, but I've got a little bit of an outline here that I'll try and follow to kind of walk you guys through how that first attempt went, go over some of the common questions I've got, and let you know finally at the end what the plan is now, and when we'll be going back up the mountain, because that is definitely the plan, is to still make a record-breaking run up to the summit. So let's start kind of last time we talked. We were in Kare, and it was a pretty quick turnaround from there. We got news pretty late from Dawa Steven, who's our guy here at Asian Trekking, and he's super plugged into the whole community of Everest and climbing. He's our logistics organizer, and he had heard, hey, they're going for the summit a little bit earlier, they being the rope fixers, which was one of the things we were waiting for, was for the ropes to be fixed to the summit. So we had a little bit of a mad scramble from Kare, but we managed to pack all of our stuff up and get everything over here to Everest Base Camp just 2 days or so before our actual summit attempt. So the plan was we were shooting for the night of May 11th, May 12th, and I think we got to base camp maybe May 9th. So we had about 2 days to kind of get everything ready. In terms of the pre-climb logistics, everything went super smoothly. Dawa is absolutely the man in terms of logistics. So he had all kinds of support kind of plans and protocols ready for us to go in terms of both safety and performance for support. You'll have to excuse me. There will be some helicopters flying over because Everest Base Camp is a bit of a zoo, and we have constant flights. So Dawa had a really good plan. We had Sherpas who were able to carry some stuff up for us onto the mountain. Actually, we'd actually gotten some stuff here earlier before we even got here. So I had a bag of stuff already at Camp 4, which is the South Col, almost 8,000 meters. And then we also had our kind of last stuff that we sent up to Camp 2, which is about 6,500 meters. And those were on the mountain ready for us. Basically, everything was good to go. We were all feeling pretty good. Chris and I were stoked. We were ready to go. And then it was basically summit day. So May 11th is kind of an odd day. We ended up pushing our attempt a little bit earlier. So originally we were planning to leave around midnight, and we were keeping a really close eye on the weather, and it looked like there was some wind that was coming in the originally scheduled to come in the late afternoon, and it ended up that the forecast had that coming in earlier and earlier. So we, instead of leaving at midnight, we had scheduled to leave around 9 p.m. And the idea there was, sorry, there's our heli leaving camp now. The idea with the earlier summit was we were trying to stage it so that we would avoid some of the crowds. We've talked a lot about crowds on Everest on this mountain, and the idea was by leaving between 9 p.m. and midnight, what that would allow us to do would be, we'd get to Camp 2. Camp 1 isn't, hardly anyone uses that. So we'd get to Camp 2 and then leave before any of the commercial clients from Camp 2 would be leaving to go to Camp 3, because we'd be there, in the middle of the night, sometime between like 12 and 2. And then we'd get to Camp 3 as well before the big groups who would leave Camp 3 would be going to Camp 4. We'd be still there kind of in the middle of the night. And so that was the plan of leaving really early. And what that does is it kind of messes with your whole, pre-summit day, because 9 p.m. working backwards, I'm kind of like waking up, getting up and having breakfast at around 7 o'clock at night. And then that means kind of you're trying to lie down and get some rest at like noon. And it's just hard to do. The body doesn't really want to do that. So it was a pretty sleepless afternoon and day. I actually just laid down for like 5 or 6 hours. I don't think I got a single wink of sleep, but it was, the adrenaline's there, the excitement's there. You get up, it's 7 o'clock, it's getting dark, and that's like everything is getting really exciting at that point. So that was would it be better to leave 3 or 4 hours later and actually be able to get some sleep? Sure. But again, it's going to be an all-night project at the end of the day. So one of my like little truisms that I've said a lot about myself is I think one of my greatest abilities as an athlete is my ability for self-deception and lying to myself. And I think this is definitely one of those times where you have to just get up and pretend it's a new day, even though like you haven't gotten any sleep, you've just been lying down, reading, whatever it is. You get up and you do what you would do normally in the morning. You have coffee, breakfast, whatever that is, and act like it's actually early morning instead of, whatever, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So we did that. We had a great little just chilling out. Vibes were good. Was able to call my folks because the time zones lined up, so that was great. And was with Chris, and then Chris's partner Aaron Tunn was there, as well as my one of my old best friends, David Wilder. So we had a really just good vibes overall in that hour or two before we got ready. And then we walked over to what we had decided as the official start of the route. And that is basically where base camp ends and the ice fall begins. It's about a 10-minute walk from our camp because our camp is kind of closer to the entrance of Everest Base Camp. So we get up there and have a little puja ceremony, like a very low-key puja ceremony, which is, we've talked about this before, kind of the Buddhist ceremony, asking for permission to go up the mountain, say some last, meditations, prayers, whatever you want to call it, to the mountain. And then we were off. So the first section we've talked about a lot is the Khumbu Icefall. It's the part that I had been kind of the most anxious about for the entire trip. It was more direct and less scary and exposed from other people who had gone through already this season. And that really turned out to be the case. We made really good time, Chris and I. And, we had done the Icefall, I think 5 or 6 times last year round trip. So like 12 trips through, which is pretty scary and not fantastic. But it definitely did feel less exposed. It felt like there was less stuff hanging above you all the time that could fall. And knock on wood, we heard 0 avalanches, like big avalanches from, the Nuptse and the west shoulder of Everest. The Icefall is basically this really narrow gully that goes through right between the west shoulder of Mount Everest and Nuptse, which is kind of the other side of this valley. And you often get big avalanches off of those faces. And when we've had, really catastrophic events in the Icefall, like in 2014, for example, when I think it was over 20 people were killed in one fell swoop, it's usually when you have a really big detachment from one of those walls of ice or snow that falls into the Icefall. So that's, and also just, when you're going through, you hear these avalanches coming off, whether they're coming right into the Icefall or not, it's still pretty scary. So that was really nice to not hear any avalanches. We had a safe trip through and we made really good time. Ahead of this, I had kind of put together a basic, best case scenario splits and then kind of medium case scenario splits. And my best case scenario splits was getting to Camp 1 in 2 hours from the start. And we were through the Icefall, I think, in 1 hour and 56 minutes. So we were even ahead of the best possible case scenario, which is just fantastic. I was super, super stoked about that. And yeah, Chris and I stayed together. We did separate a tiny bit at the end, which ended up causing some issues with communication, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, he ended up feeling not super well. Turned out he kind of had like a flu bug, which then ended up like totally wrecking him later in the day. But he did a fantastic job. Just so nice to have a friendly face and just good company and laughter going through the Icefall, which is, like I've said many times, a big scary place. So I get up to Camp 1. Like I said, Camp 1 is pretty much empty. Very, very few people stay there because it's so close to Camp 2. So we get through there. Again, Chris is maybe 5 or 7 minutes behind me at that point. And then I make the quick section from Camp 1 to Camp 2, I think in maybe 55 minutes to get there in just under 3 hours to Camp 2. And that was the first part that I really did fully solo, and it felt really, really good. Just kind of let myself go. It's definitely one of the more vulnerable sections of the route. It's really, it's Everest flat. It's relatively speaking flat. I mean, it's probably 10 to 15% grade as you go up the Western Khum, which is this big open valley between, you have a big horseshoe basically where you have Everest, on the left upper side of the horseshoe, Lhotse on the upper right side, and then Nuptse on the lower right side. So you have this big horseshoe and you're kind of going up this gentle valley in the middle up to Camp 2. So I made really good time to there, felt great. And then once I got to Camp 2, was able to find our team, including Tenzing David Sherpa, who is Dallas Stevens' brother. He was up there, and Dr. Abu, who is our medical doctor that's up high on the mountain for the expedition. And they're both super, super helpful in terms of making that transition really quick. The idea was that would be my bigger transition where I kind of started putting on my warmer boots and my bigger coat and stuff like that. Excuse me. But I found I was actually quite warm. So I decided to pack all that stuff and carry it up to Camp 3 and make the change up there instead, because I'd been, in that point, just wearing my La Sportiva Cyclones, which is basically a running shoe with a waterproof gaiter over it. And the temperature was not that cold. It was probably single digits Fahrenheit, maybe minus 10 Celsius, minus 15 max. So really not that cold when you're moving well. And then the snafu up there was that I realized that I have, thanks to this company called Lens, Lenz, I have some heated gloves, heated socks, and heated insoles. And I had the batteries of all of those things were in Chris Fisher's backpack, which was back down the mountains. Anyways, I at that point ended up having to turn around and jog back down the mountain. Chris had handed them off to a Sherpa because, like I said, he had started feeling quite sick when he got to Camp 1. So Temba Bote, one of the Asian trekking Sherpas, was carrying those up, and I was able to reconnect with him on the route and then make my way back to Camp 1. And honestly, it felt really, really silly. I'm like, I can't believe I'm trying to run to the top of Mount Everest right now, and I'm running back towards base camp. But, it was what it was. That's pretty mission critical gear for one. We got higher up into like the really cold temperatures for feet and hands, because that's usually where people have problem with frostbite. So definitely didn't want to take any gambles with that. So managed to get the batteries, get back to Camp 2. That stop ended up being much longer than planned. I think I had like 10 minutes penciled in, and it was almost 45 minutes because I had to, run back down the hill and back. But eventually I was on my way to Camp 3, feeling really good, and was able to get back into a rhythm there on the way up. There's a nice kind of flattish section again where you continue basically to the end of the valley. And then you hit what's called the Lhotse face, which is the first, really, I'd say, steeper, more prolonged section of climbing on the route. So there's a small technical section called the Bergschrund. That was pretty straightforward this year, which is great. And then you're on the Lhotse face itself, which is, somewhere between, let's say, 45 and 75 degrees. So it's steep. It's not vertical, but it's significantly steeper than the kind of, quote unquote, runnable trail that we had below. And that leads you up to Camp 3. So all this part went really well. Again, if you kind of take out the stoppage time for having to run back downhill and get those batteries, all of those splits that I had were still right on pace with the kind of best case scenario splits that I had mapped out. So that was super exciting. I think it was a little over an hour and a half from Camp 2 to Camp 3, which was exactly where I wanted to be. And then I was able to find two of the guys from the film crew up at Camp 3, who the plan there was really just to, okay, now maybe put the warmer stuff on. So sit there for 5 or 10 minutes, change boots, put some warmer layers on, get some water, and then head up towards Camp 4. This is where things really took a turn, unfortunately, and even more unfortunately, all of this was captured on camera and is really embarrassing for me, and I'm sure will be in the movie. But long story short, we sat down, and took my Cyclones, my La Sportiva Cyclones, the shoe off, and had my higher mountain boots, and was putting those on. It's a boot called G Summit. Great boot, super lightweight, but much, much warmer. This is what I wore on Makalu a few weeks ago, up to well over 8,000. I think I talked about this on an earlier episode. The putting on of high mountain boots in the high mountains can be incredibly hard. It's really cold. The boots get really stiff. And so the zipper was really hard to pull. So what I did, which I've done a million times, and again, all this is on camera, which is super embarrassing. I'm like, hey, check this out. This is a pro tip I've figured out. I take a carabiner, like a small semi-technical carabiner, and you clip that through the zipper pull, and then you use that to pull the zipper. So you get way more leverage with a carabiner than just the little tiny pull that you have to kind of crimp with your fingers. And I did that on one boot and it worked fine. I did that on my right boot and I pulled it and it ripped the metal piece that actually closes the teeth of the zipper. So not the zipper pull, but the little, train piece that actually pulls the teeth together. That piece actually broke right in half and came right off. So now the entire closure mechanism of the zipper is no longer attached to the zipper and is broken. And we are at 7,100 meters or so in the middle of the night on Mount Everest. And this is like, this is my day. Like, to take a step back, at this point, even with the extra 45 minutes or whatever with the batteries, I remember coming into Camp 3 and just being like, seeing these two guys, Mark and Eric, who I've gotten to know a little bit over the last month. And I'm like, this is it. This is the day. I feel it in my bones. Like, everything is going great. This is like, I'm so ready. Splits are great. Body feels great. And to have that feeling, and then this one thing, like literally in 1 second, it's just like, everything is like completely off the rails. I'm just like, well, this might be the end of the day right here, because the way that these boots close, Let me see for my YouTube audience. I think I have something similar enough here. Oh, gosh, one sec. Yeah, so here's the Cyclone. So this is kind of my daily shoe, but it's the same idea, is the zipper closes up this outer part of the boot, and that's really what keeps the boot waterproof and warm. So imagine that, but it's a much, much bigger boot, obviously, and more robust. And when you don't have that closure, your foot is really much, much more exposed to the elements, whether that's cold or wind or water or whatever it is. So I would say 9 times out of 10, that event immediately, and I knew this as soon as it happened, I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe this. Like nine times out of 10, it's just, this is it. This is the end of the day. Let's go down, try again later. We got very lucky in that Eric, one of the camera operators, had a couple of these hyperlight bags. They're basically this like really hard, it's basically a really hard plastic bag, like a tough plastic bag, not heavy, but looks like not much more than a shopping bag, but you know, it's like Tyvek. It's the material that, you know, they put on houses and stuff, and it's very, very robust. So we had a couple of those, and we put kind of one on the inside and then one on the outside of the boot, and kind of used the crampon to like cinch it all together. But still, the boot was like not attached super well to my foot. And there's definitely a little bit of anxiety there of just like, oh my gosh, is this going to work? Like, I'm going up to the highest I've ever been on a pretty cold day, and I really don't want to lose all my toes. So yeah, that was not the best, you know, in terms of obviously that happening. I mean, I think I did a good job of staying calm in the moment, in that didn't like outwardly just like panic and start screaming and crying. But I think I just immediately went into problem solving mode, because I'm like, oh shit, this is a really big deal. We need to fix this immediately. And, you know, the first thing I was like, okay, does anyone have duct tape? Because if we could just wrap the whole thing in duct tape, maybe that'll work. We eventually came up with the hyperlight bag solution. But, you know, at the end of the day, it definitely took a little bit of a toll mentally. And also physically. I think just sitting there at 7,100 meters, which is, what is that, 23,000 feet maybe? You know, sitting there, and it's pretty cold. It's the middle of the night, and we're trying to fix this, not moving. I got very, very cold and feel like my kind of just general metabolism and cardiovascular system almost like went to sleep, you know, between the literal cold and the circadian rhythm. You know, it must have been what, like 2 o'clock in the morning. So super middle of the night for what I'm used to. So that was, really not ideal, and just felt like, yeah, I lost a lot of momentum, and eventually did get the boot on, got myself up and walking out of Camp 3, but I just felt both physically and mentally like I'd lost a lot of momentum. You know, like I came in, like I said, feeling on top of the world, and like this was my day, this is going to be the day. And now having lost almost an hour there and 45 minutes below, suddenly that's almost 2 hours of stoppage time that I really hadn't planned for. And this pretty serious gear failure that we were dealing with it was honestly, it was tough to leave. And I feel like I never quite got my mojo back, like physically or mentally, once I left Camp 3. I was moving quite a bit slower, and then it's kind of a vicious cycle where, you know, when you move slower, you generate less heat, you feel worse, you know, all that compounding with the boot and feeling nervous and anxious about that, and watching, you know, the bag would slip down and I'd have to stop and adjust it. So that slowed my pace down quite a bit, of just constantly having to adjust this thing and hoping that it would stay on for another, whatever it was going to be, 12 hours. That took a lot of time and mental and physical energy to think about. So I was moving quite a bit slower above Camp 3 than I had been before, and also then, you know, than I would have wanted to be under ideal circumstances, and just really never felt that good. Eventually, you know, it got to a point where daylight had broken. I was pretty far behind schedule at that point. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is, because of this 2 hours of stoppage time, and because of the fact that I was then going slower on that section between Camp 3 and Camp 4, I ended up literally running out of my on-mountain nutrition. I had a bag of nutrition stashed at Camp 4, but I literally ran out of gels and stuff. And one of the things that I've learned and was reinforced this day is the line between feeling okay and being completely bonked out of your mind is really, really sharp at those high altitudes, and it's really hard to play catch up. You know, if you're in an ultra marathon at sea level, maybe you can take have a 30 or 60 minute period where your stomach's a little wonky and you don't take any fuel, and then you can kind of make that up by eating more because your stomach's able to digest more quickly. I think once you are at really high altitudes, like over 7,000 meters, your digestion literally does not work as well. It's much less efficient. It's slower. And so even if you slam 4 gels at once, it's not going to have the same impact. It's not going to feel as good as it does, at sea level, or even in a race like Leadville that's only 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet above sea level. So it was kind of this, just like combination of slowing down because of the boot, being nervous because of the boot. I'm sure that had some impact. Losing all the momentum, and both physically and mentally, just never feeling like I was able to get into a good rhythm where I was able to continue moving, which is a big problem that high up. And then compounding all that with bonking, I was just moving so slowly. Honestly, it was just, everything was falling apart, and I kind of knew it. And, I got up to Lhotse Camp 4, which I think is 7,800 meters, and got on the radio with Dow Steven. And I've said before, I don't think there's anyone more important on my team in terms of safety and performance than Dawa. He's the guy who famously told me to go for it on Manaslu when that was a training day, and then it ended up being the record day. And I would not have done that without him and his input. And similarly here, when he tells me, hey man, this is not the day, and you got to go down and you got to save it and you got to come back up later, it's devastating at one level, but I trust him literally with my life and with my performance. And so that was what happened. I called him. I'm like, hey man, like, I feel like shit. This sucks. I'm not moving fast. I have all these problems. I've lost all this time. And he said, hey man, I see it. I'm watching you. I'm tracking you. And I think that now is the time to turn around. It's a great training day. You spent a lot of time up high, but we saved the effort, and you got to head down. And so that's what I did. It was a pretty hard moment right there, pretty emotional, just because, I really, really, really wanted this to work this time. I really wanted it to be one and done. And the truth is, it's a really complex project, and a couple of small things went pretty haywire, and that really derailed it. Yeah, it was not the best moment of my life to hear that, but at the same time, when I hear Dawa say that, I can trust him 100%. So that was the end of the day in terms of the ascent. And then on the way down, I think I really felt how much that lack of nutrition had impacted me, because I was literally just stumbling around. I was so tired. Probably one of the most tired I've ever been was getting back down to Camp 3. I was literally like tripping over my own feet and just making, just dumb little slips that I shouldn't have. So to me, it just reminds me, one of the things I'll talk about at the end is kind of lessons learned. And that's definitely one of the biggest ones. It's just the nutrition is unbelievably important. And if you miss even 30 minutes, it's just a disaster. Got down to Camp 3, refueled, got some hot soup and like actual camping food meals from the guys there, which is awesome. Super great to have that. Rested a little bit, and then went down to Camp 2. And that was honestly probably the most miserable afternoon of my whole life. Camp 2 is an oven. It's right in the center of the Western Coombe, this valley that gets almost no wind, gets a ton of sun during the day, and you have glacier all around you, which is reflecting the sun back at you. So it's essentially like being in one of those, like solar water heaters or something, where you have like all these mirrors pointing at you with the sun. It feels like being roasted under a magnifying glass or something. So that was just unbelievably brutal. It was so hot there. I couldn't sleep. I think I was too caffeinated and too wired, and just unbelievably miserable. And Chris was also a trooper. I mean, he'd been literally throwing up and had a splitting headache all day, and I had like some kind of sinus infection. So we were both just like two miserable peas in a miserable pod in this tent, waiting for it to get dark and cold enough to go back down through the icefall safely. That was really all it was. So, just basically had some soup and laid down in the tent and like kind of tossed and turned and listened to an audiobook for a few hours. And finally, just so exhausted, managed to get ourselves up, rally, had some caffeine, and made our way back down through the icefall. Again, safe, no avalanche sounds, which was fantastic. And we made really good time. I think we were like a little over an hour 15 maybe, through the icefall back to base camp, where graciously Aaron and David met us at the where we had started. So we had some company for the last 15 minutes, and I think they brought us like a Sprite or a Fanta, and that was the nicest thing I've ever had. Just really thirsty and wonderful to have some cold liquid for that last walk back. So yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, it was not the day that I wanted, but in retrospect, I think there are a lot of silver linings. Right now it's been 4 days and I feel fantastic, which is really interesting. And I felt much, much better the day after the attempt than I did, for example, when I got down from Makalu that next day. So I think that I'm really grateful to Dawa Steven for turning me around when he did. That was so crucial, because I think, if we had kept going even for another couple of hours, just getting into that caloric debt of not having enough fuel, getting higher on the mountain, making the descent longer, all those things I think would have made the recovery so much harder. And now I feel honestly more confident than before, just because those early splits went so well, felt really good, felt appropriate. And I feel like I got a really good training stimulus from going up to almost 8,000 meters and being able to come down, and then 24 hours feeling pretty normal. These last 3 days have been really chill in terms of training, just a lot of easy spinning on the bike, some easy walking around. And then yesterday I did my first kind of structured workout back over on Kalapatar, which was kind of our local training hill. And literally without trying, I was able to break my FKT, my record from last year, by more than a minute on a 27-minute climb. So that's really significant. And to me, it shows not only, yes, my fitness is still super high, it's better than last year, but also that my recovery from this effort went really well. In terms of other things learned, I think that we talked about fueling, so I won't talk about that again. The other big thing was it was actually much warmer than I expected all the way up to Camp 3. So I think instead of doing that big gear change at Camp 2, we'll try and do it at Camp 3. So I'm not just carrying my stuff up there for no reason, but actually just having it already up waiting for me at Camp 3. And then I can just go straight there and do a quick gear change. And I think semi-related to that, when I look at my Manaslu record from last year as well, I think I had like 7 minutes of stoppage time for the entire day, or at least on the way up, for 9 and almost 10 hours. So I think that's a really big thing that I've noticed, was those long breaks really did sap some energy and mess with my momentum a little bit. Gosh, sorry guys, a lot of helicopters flying. And that's something that I want to try and fix. So again, going basically straight to Camp 3, I think we can be there in 4.5 hours. So just carrying all of the nutrition that I'm going to need for that from the start and getting right up there. And then having one break, and then basically going from Camp 3 to the summit. Maybe we have a quick stop at Camp 4 if we need to change some gear, put on some warmer stuff, things like that. But yeah, overall, I think the minimizing stoppage time is super important. And then the final thing I'll say is, because everybody asks about crowds and queues and, stopping on the ropes and things like that, I think our plan worked really well up to Camp 3, Camp 4. My goodness, there's like 30 helicopters in the last 30 minutes. Anyways, basically I had no issues with traffic. There was almost no traffic between base camp and Camp 3. And then from Camp 3 to Camp 4, I would say there were maybe 30 to 50 people on that section. And that piece, I would say, is pretty easy to pass people on. People are generally really kind and gracious, and I'm always trying to be polite and nice and make sure that I'm not being a dick about it, but like, just, hey, can I scooch by you on the right whenever you feel comfortable, things like that. I have a longer safety cable that I can use to kind of loop around people. So I think that part was really good, but obviously 30 to 50 people is really different than 400 people, which is what we're going to see in the coming days here. So that leads really well into the end of this episode, which is thinking about, okay, when are we going to go? It is currently May 17th, Saturday. There are literally hundreds of people on the mountain who are going for the summit in the next 2 days, the 18th and 19th. Probably those will be happening or have happened by the time you guys are hearing this or watching this. So that is the really big thing, is trying to now wait for all those groups to clear off the mountain. Originally our plan was we go right after the rope fixers and we go before all the really big groups. Now we're in the time period where, unfortunately, all the big groups are going, and we have to be really patient and just wait. So it is a waiting game here at base camp. And for me, honestly, it's been okay. I'm just kind of getting back into the groove of training, and it's felt good. But we are looking probably no earlier than May 21st, maybe as late as 24, 25, 26. But we're keeping an eye on both the weather and the crowd situations. Mostly just letting the mountain clear out, letting all these really big groups go up in this first really good window that's coming in the next 48 to 72 hours, the 18th, 19th, and 20th of May here. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, all those people get to the summit and then off the mountain safely and leave it in good condition for us to go up quickly when there's a lot fewer people on the mountain. So anyways, everybody, that's all for my solo episode here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I know it's always nice to have a conversation, have Mr. C on, have his perspective as well, but he will be back soon, hopefully for our next episode. My goodness, sorry, so many helis, guys. I hope it's not like totally destroying the audio. So that's all for today's episode, guys. Please, as always, send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can also read my raw training logs on my blog, tylercandrews.com, and get that delivered to your email via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production and brought to you by the good folks at Chosky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Ciao.